Hello, everybody. Welcome to Veterans Voice, the first one of the new year, number 18. Now we're at. So it's just a quick note on what Veterans Voice is all about before I bring on my special guest this week. So we tell our veteran stories, leaving the armed forces, journey through transition and into the second career, and just learn a little bit about what opportunities there are for everybody and how they've structured their journey. So before he gets too bored and disappears off, I'll bring on my special guest this week, Steve Young. Welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Got the technical troubles getting on here. I'm in a hotel this week. These are not my curtains. So I'm in a hotel this week, and there's only one plug socket that's working. The rest of them don't work. I only just found that out when I started plugging all my paraphernalia in. So anybody joining us, say hello in the chat, just like we've got Dan Marshall joining in here, and we've had Simon Barr. Welcome, Dan, and welcome, Simon, and welcome, Steve. So Steve, tell me about Clint Eastwood.
So it's a bit of a boring story, and it's kind of funny doing this just to start with, because if this is about chatting about transition, it feels like such a long time ago. I've been a civilian for nearly as long as I was in the Navy, so it feels like ancient history. But yeah, so Clint, if I'm at one of these boring leadership away day things, and they ask you, tell me something interesting about you, my usual one for shutting people up is I was once part of Clint Eastwood's security team. So when I was much younger, had more hair, and carried a lot less around my midriff, I used to teach martial arts. And so I did some security work, and I ended up being part of a 3-man team looking after Clint Eastwood when he came to Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Film Festival, because he was promoting a film at the time. And there's a picture of me in some old evening news article looking very serious and very thin behind a very tall Clint Eastwood.
This is when you had a 6-pack instead of a barrel, was it?
6-pack. It was probably a small draft pack rather than a barrel.
Yeah. So did you get to run alongside his car like he did in the movies?
No. I was in a chase car. So we had 3 cars, one in front, one behind, and him in a much nicer car in the middle.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah. So yeah, sort of interesting stuff. We've got some more people joined us. Scott, a fellow fish head, dare I say. So Scott's in the Navy. Chris, I've not met Chris before, so welcome, Chris. So also tell me about, these are just the little icebreakers, Iceland. And how you got to Iceland and what a golden circle is.
Yeah. So my wife had a brain hemorrhage back in 2019, and since then I've probably given less of a crap about things and got far more experimental about life. And I was in a bar in Dublin, in the Temple Bar area, and the band were playing, and I got chatting to the band, and I was asking them where else they'd played, because I'd seen them a couple of times in Dublin, and they said, we play in a number of places in Ireland, but actually we're going to Iceland soon for the Iceland Culture Festival, which is a bit like St. Patrick's Day on heat. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I'd gone in quite early on, and I was doing some emails and stuff like that, and then they played, and I had a few beers, and by the time I woke up in the morning, I'd booked tickets to Iceland to go and see them in Iceland. So I rocked up to Iceland for the weekend, and unlike many people who go to Iceland and do all these big touristy things, I went to Iceland to sit in the Drunk Rabbit, which is the only Irish bar in Reykjavik, and got drunk listening to these guys. We did do one touristy thing, which was to go and do the Golden Circle. Normally people do that in some big touristy coach. We did it in the pub owner's SUV. He's an ex-Mr. Iceland bodybuilding champion. And whilst we were doing the Golden Circle, looking at all the key touristy things, we worked our way through a slab of Guinness, which was my first time drinking Guinness. So first time drinking Guinness in Iceland, in the back of an SUV, being driven by Mr. Iceland.
Well, that's the best way to drink Guinness on ice, isn't it? So yeah, very good. So yeah, there's a few stories there. Yeah, interesting stuff. Right, background to your military career. What did you do? You joined the Royal Navy.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, interested in the Navy really young. At 12 years old, I was in the Sea Cadets thinking, oh, I'm going to join the Navy, and joined straight from school. They paid for me to do my degree, which was great. So I was in Edinburgh, do my degree um, uh, in engineering, back into the rest of my Navy training. Was due to go to ships, but at the last minute I had a change of heart, mainly I think around the change of base porting of the destroyers. So I volunteered for submarines with about 3 days to spare. And my first day of submarine training was getting drunk in HMS Dolphin with a whole bunch of diesel submariners that had just come back off patrol. And from there, I did my submarine training on Resolution on its second last trip, and then was very lucky to pick up a brand new building submarine in Barrow, do my lieutenant's job, and then my final job in the Navy was as head of department on Vengeance, running a weapons department.
And that took you to some pretty exotic places. You were telling me about torpedo trials somewhere.
Yeah. So being on a bomber is pretty boring because you kind of sail, dive, and come back. Ideally, a bit lighter and definitely a lot greyer in complexion. But in the middle of my two sea jobs, I did about 6 years back to back, 6 years across two jobs, both related to torpedo trials. And torpedo trials for the UK Navy is either done up at the Isle of Loch near Skye, or on the US Navy's deep water range in the Bahamas. So I went to the Bahamas about, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks a year for about 5 years, which was
Not
terribly
bad.
difficult to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the six pack slowly disappeared, was it?
Yeah. I mean, the US Navy base there has got their own shop, and it's irresponsible pricing. So I think at the time it was about $5 for a liter of Bacardi, and about $8 for a slab of beer. So yeah, irresponsible pricing. Many dramas that shall remain on the island, I think.
All right, yeah. What happens in Bahamas stays in Bahamas. So
Yeah,
Scott, yeah, a fellow submariner is has done similar, I think.
yeah. I mean, it's a place of many tales, I'm sure, and
Yeah,
and probably many disciplinary cases and fines.
yeah, or maybe, but yeah. Say what stays in Bahamas, what happens in Bahamas stays in Bahamas. So, what made you decide to come out the Navy?
So I suppose I had quite a young family, and I was working out, well, what does all this mean? And um, I kind of on the run up to leaving my at sea job, which is the kind of job you have a big build up to. It was just starting to look like I was going to have to do a lot of jobs down south, and promotion wasn't going to be in the near future. And so I thought, well, actually, I might do a better job of being my own appointer than running about chasing everything. I think because of my background in being in strategic weapons, the types of job that I was going to be lined up to do was pretty constrained. And so, I just thought, well, I had this random idea that if I'm going to do it, I need to do it before my age starts with a four, because I had this really big false impression that you couldn't possibly start a second career when you were so old that you were in your 40s. I've been proven very wrong on that front.
Yeah. Well, so some people start some in the 50s and 60s. Wasn't it Colonel Sanders didn't actually turn a profit until he was 80 or something? Something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
So now this is the first testimony to leaving the armed forces. You don't have to do the same job that you did inside. You don't have to be a motor mechanic outside if you're a mechanic inside. You went from submarines into aerospace.
Yeah, actually, because I live in Edinburgh, my desire was to get into the financial services, into banking. Loads of banks in Edinburgh. Um, at the time, that was a really difficult sales pitch to convince people in the financial services environment that you had transferable skills, and so I wasn't very successful at that. A job popped up working for BAE Systems on the design of mission computer for a Tornado upgrade program for the Saudis. And I had done some sort of random pitch interview that convinced them that looking after intercontinental ballistic missiles meant that I knew about developing aerospace products.
Yeah. They both fly, don't they? So yeah,
I think it's probably fair to say that there wasn't much design work went on in my last job in the Navy.
Yeah. So you went into aerospace, and then that's the transferable skills bit is really important in terms of you can teach technical stuff, but the skills that you learn in the armed forces, the leadership, the work ethic, etc., they're really important, and they stand you in good stead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's funny. I mean, in my naivety, I was a bit dumbfounded. I'd been offered the job, and so I asked him in my first week, why did I get the job? You know, I don't have a background in running design projects. I've never really managed a profit and loss account. You know, why did you give me the job? And he said, well, the thing that we're really needing is people who can lead. The rest you can learn on the course, but what you can't do on the course is to learn how to manage people. And at the time, it was a big realization for me just how valuable all of that experience was, of how would I describe it? Situational leadership. You know, we have to adopt our leadership style often in the military, and it's easy to lose sight of just how valuable that is. I'm just seeing Scott's comment. Yeah, absolutely. The world has changed dramatically in financial services from 18 years ago, where they didn't really understand it. In fact, in many sectors have got far more clued up on those military transferable skills.
Yeah, and you know, Scott's made a very good point. The financial services have really opened up, and
Yeah.
18 years ago it was a different story. But as you get certain markets and sectors start to understand the value of veterans, they start to open up and have have these programs. So engineering is starting to wake up to the value of veterans, and you can teach the hard skills, but it's the softer skills that are a lot more difficult.
And I think it's a really important point, Matt. You know, my experience of chatting to people as they come out is everyone thinks it's going to be easy for an engineer because you've got a trade and you're going to go do something, and it's going to be far more difficult for other people. I had a good friend of mine who I caught up with just as he was leaving, and he had been, doing watchkeeping type stuff on a small ship, driving small ships around, and I think he was looking to get a van and become a handyman, and now he's managing complex technical upgrades on large offshore platforms for a big ROV company. And a lot of that came out of the conference about you don't have to be an engineer to get into project management, because project management is all about managing people.
Yeah, absolutely. So many, and I had so many, not personally having issues, but I encountered so many issues in oil and gas and engineering where you've had a very good engineer, a very good scaffolder, a very good painter, have been then made up to a project manager of a painting project, and it doesn't really work because they've not learnt. Not there are exceptions. They've not always learnt the management skills, but they also then start to get down in the weeds when it gets technical on the project because they know the business.
Yeah.
So so very good, very good point there. So what did your second career look like then?
So I left at 37. I'd done just under 19 years service. I moved into BAE Systems. Within about 9 months, I'd been promoted. I'd picked up a project manager working for me. Within 12 months, I'd been promoted again. And almost within weeks of that, the site I was on went through site closure. I got asked to move to Kent. and out of my team of 120, about 110 left the business, which hit me really between the eyes about this job for life and job security, and but also it gave me a lot of confidence around that redundancies just happen all the time, and if you're good, you're always going to be valuable, and therefore you shouldn't see these as a threat. Actually, it can shake some stuff up and clear some deadwood out, and so it can actually be an opportunity for good people. Yeah. So I moved from there down to Kent. I spent a bit of time down there, and then landed a job back in Scotland, which was a big mistake. Within 6 weeks of arriving at the job, I decided it wasn't the right job, so I moved within 6 months to another aerospace role. So I did about 4.5 years in aerospace jobs around fast jets, helicopters, UAVs, and then I landed my first job as a director. It's back in maritime, doing a big recovery project for astute class training. So back in the base, back surrounded by submariners, but with a very different outlook because I've been away from it for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. So that's a big recovery project. That company got bought by Babcock. I did about 10 years in Babcock in total. Within that, about 5 years in the maritime business. I got a secondment to Strathclyde University, which was fascinating because I was running a research centre in nuclear with 9 professors, having done my degree at Polytechnic. Jumped from there into Babcock's nuclear business. Did about 3 years there, including a year in America, in Canada, and some time right up on the north coast at Dounreay. And as I mentioned earlier, my wife had a brain hemorrhage, so that was a kind of trigger for a change in career direction again.
Mm-hmm. Changing pattern. That's where we first met. You were at Strathclyde, and I was head of asset integrity at Babcock, and I was trying to come across and bring some best practice that you'd encountered into what I was doing. So that's where we first met many moons ago. Scott's made a very good point here, and I'm totally agree with this. You perform better when you know less about the subject matter. When you're outside your comfort zone, I think you perform a lot better. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, actually, some of the best project managers I've met in very technical organizations are not engineers. So I can think of two. One had come off the shop floor for manufacturing. The other had a kind of civil engineering background. And so very different background to the mainstream project managers. And they brought a different perspective. And they were both really good. And interestingly, in a very male-dominated environment I've worked in, some of the best project managers I've met have been non-engineer females.
Yeah, because they don't take any mess.
They just bring a different view to them.
Yeah. I know some very good lady project managers. So there's some. It's great to have that mix. And Inga makes a really good point. So she's it's not just about second full-time career at 59. She's still had something, so she's got a portfolio working, a bit like you and I now. Was having built up a level of experience, you can now dip into several projects and bring often what the same value that a full-time, less experienced person would bring.
Yeah, I mean, Inga's point is really interesting. When I left, I was 37, big mortgage, young kids. My risk appetite was incredibly low. And indeed, I didn't really feel, I did think about consultancy when I left, and I just didn't feel I had the skill set at the time. I was low in confidence in going down that route. And it's taken me 18 years of industry experience to get to the point where I've moved away from full-time roles into managing a mix of stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into as well.
Yeah. So very good point. Thanks, Inga. So what made you decide to start your own business?
So I've been kind of toying with the idea for a bit, probably about 5 years. And when my wife had her brain hemorrhage, it was all big drama, emergency brain surgery, very life and death. That provided a trigger. It was about, I'd spent a long time looking up the career ladder, thinking, well, what's my next step? And when I'd left, I'd kind of mapped out, I'll be a director by then, MD. And there was a kind of combination of turning 50, the whole medical drama at home, and I just suddenly stopped giving a shit about all that promotion prospects and started thinking about actually what motivates me is probably two or three things. The first is doing interesting work. The second is doing more outside of work. And the third, I suppose, is maybe to step on from being my own appointer into, managing things very much on a task by task basis. I'm at the point now where I'm absolutely in control of the work that I do, which is a great place to be. I can manage dealing with politics much better in this role than I did when I was in my full-time role.
Yeah, because as you say, you give less of a shit.
Yeah.
We're allowed to swear on here. We're almost out of the watershed. So how's the consultancy going? Well, give us a flavour of what you do now.
So I'm about 21 months in, so still very much a trainee, is how I'd put it. It's quite a mixed bag. I've got, a bit of my career, my industry time has made me a bit like a Swiss Army knife. I've done some business winning stuff. I've done some project recoveries. I've done some startups. I've done a bit of international. I've worked in aerospace. I've worked in land. I've worked in maritime. I've worked in training. I've worked in academia. So I came out, again, quite nervous, looking for a 6 or 12-month contract. That didn't happen at all. My first contract was about 2 days. And I, by accident, fell into doing lots and lots of part-time work. So in 21 months, I probably had 32 contracts. Some have been a few hours. Some have been 6 months. Normally got 4 or 5 on the go. Some of that is coaching work. So it's a real mixed bag. If I was to try and categorize it, I'd say bid support, interim work, consultancy stroke strategy, and coaching are the main types of work. Clients have been mainly companies doing work for the MOD, but sometimes some stuff in nuclear, and sometimes rail, underground, satcoms, and I'm back at Strathclyde University a couple of days a week, doing my old job on an interim basis, delivering a change program there.
Well, I mean, the way I see it is you've built up so much experience over the years, it would be a shame to keep it to yourself. So having all these little contracts and imparting that knowledge out to a number of people can only be a good thing, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of plays to Ingo's point about, we've got something more to offer. Organisations struggle to have the broad range of skills that they need just sitting on the bench, and that creates opportunity. The main industries that I work in is defence and nuclear, and both are absolutely strapped for resource at the moment, which makes it a great market for me to be in.
Yeah, and also the point I alluded to on the post, my post this morning, citing or bigging up this event, is you don't actually have to be in a particular office. So you've conducted work in the UK from a variety of locations around the world.
Yeah, so part of my switching from live to work to live, the whole post-COVID thing's been a great opportunity. So last year, all my clients in 2022 were all UK clients, and I got paid to work in Reykjavik, Copenhagen, Gibraltar, somewhere in Spain, somewhere in Portugal, Dublin, and Southern Australia.
Yeah. So quite and sort of UK clients. So you don't have to be tied to a specific location. COVID, I think, has really opened up the world a lot to those sort of opportunities. So there's a lot going on there. Is there anything particularly that has stood out over the past year or so?
So I think why I keep saying I'm a trainee is because I'm kind of learning my new trade. Being a consultant means you can't be sometimes you're unconstrained in feedback you give. Sometimes that doesn't really work very well for you. So I've had some good experiences and bad experiences about being blunt and direct. The flexibility has been great, and I really like variety, so it's been amazing to get the variety. Some of the pieces of work have been really good. There's one particular piece of work we did for the MOD, a review. There was 4 of us, all ex-Navy, did the review, and it was great to be in that team. Sometimes doing the interim and consultancy work can feel a bit lonely. I have lots of days where I'm on my own in the office, which can be a bit lonely. The flip of that is being able to travel has just been amazing. I did. I was in Reykjavik. I'd spent the day in the Drunk Rabbit. Following morning, 8 o'clock, I'm doing a Teams call with my team. Slightly worse for wear. In digs somewhere in Iceland. It was just it's just a surreal experience compared to, working in the dockyard or something like that.
Bit like me running Veterans Voice from a hotel with dodgy curtains.
Yeah, they're definitely kind of help for heroes type curtains, aren't they?
But yeah, that's what you just said. It does look like I might just have to take them with me and hang them up when I get help for heroes on here. Yeah. So what's just drawing this to a close? I'll try and keep it to half an hour. What would be your Veterans Voice message to people leaving the armed forces?
So I've done a few chats. I've done a few chats at Career Transition Partnership, and I suppose there are probably some simple points. The first is expect it to be a roller coaster. You've been attached to that organisation for a long time, and you will have ups and downs. The second is finding a new job. It's not rocket science. It's just another SOP to learn. There are things that you do that get you a job. CTP will probably tell you it's all about networking. Well, my first director's job I got on monster.com. I'm not even sure if that exists anymore. So I got the interview through monster.com, but I probably got the job through my network in terms of gathering intelligence. So, there are lots of routes to market. I found in my first job, the motivation in industry is very different. When I was on my submarine, even if we were about to go to sea the following day, if something broke, you'd say, right, guys, we need to stay behind and fix it. And you wouldn't expect any pushback on that. That's the ethos you get. There are organisations I've worked for where even if we were in war, there would be people that would go home at 3:45 at night. So there's a whole different mindset needed for how you lead teams like that. I found doing a personal development plan has worked really well for me. I bumbled my way through my career in the Navy and only got focused on personal development on my run out. And that worked really well for me in terms of keeping my eye on where I'm going and my kind of direction of travel. The final thing I say, which is a lesson I've only learned in the last 2 years, is as you leave the military, you are effectively repositioning yourself in society. If you don't let everyone know that, if you don't sing it from the rooftops, no one will know that you're looking for a job. So you do have to get out there and tell people. So, it's the same coming out of industry into doing the work that I do now. Everyone just thinks you're an employee somewhere in Babcock. Yeah. That's what you're doing, Steve. And unless you tell them different, they've got no inclination to help you find new pieces of work. So telling people around that is really important. CTP I found really useful. Probably not the courses, but the connections that you get from that. Finding people who are 2 steps ahead of you is really useful. They're not better than you; they're just 2 steps ahead of you, and that's really useful.
Yeah, and that's really important. And everything is through your network nowadays. I mean, we've been contracting for around the same amount of time and consulting for around the same amount of time, and everything that I've got has been through my network and through LinkedIn network.
Yeah,
over the past years.
Just on that, I think we should level that a bit, because networking can all sound a bit salesy and a bit uncomfortable for service leavers. Effectively, it's having mates
Yeah,
And
that's
we
it.
all know
This is networking at the moment. It's not necessarily hire gives a job or hire gives a contract or anything. It's having conversations. It's growing that network and growing people's understanding of what you do, so that it may be that Scott, for example, knows somebody who's looking for a consultant, and Steve fits the bill. But it's so that people are aware. It's just communication. Yeah, it's not salesy. It is having lots of mates, and you did that. You had that on the inside. Now you have to transfer those skills to the outside, and military have a lot of transferable skills. So yeah, so that brings us neatly onto the half hour, and that was a whirlwind. And thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much to Scott, Dan, Inga, Dan Marshall, and all the others that commented. It's great to have comments come in because we know that somebody's listening then. But thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.